to another episode of the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host, and on this episode, I am thrilled to have Edward Egros on the show. He is an analytics and sports betting expert, and he has also had a wide variety of media jobs, including Fox, FanDuel, and the NFL. Edward, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me on. It is March Madness, so I have been told.
It is, man. Are you pumped? I mean, we're like, less than 2 weeks away from Selection Sunday?
It's so funny because after the Super Bowl, there is that sort of lull. Now, I do get into like the Daytona 500, but there is this lull that even though I want to be prepared for March Madness and prepared for the NBA playoffs, all sorts of stuff, still though, it's hard to kind of keep that high octane emotion going. So it's nice to be rewarded all the way around.
Right. I think one thing that I've really done this year is I actually got into March Madness, like I think the Tuesday after the Super Bowl.
Oh, nice.
It's kind of been my New Year's resolution, just like get on stuff. Like my corporate taxes are actually done. So,
wow.
I'm like ready to roll.
You overachiever, you.
Well, that would just put in stark contrast what's happened in previous years with a lot of those things, you know.
Fair enough.
The Football Analytics Show is brought to you by the Power Ranks Sports Betting Newsletter. Looking for some action on any given weekend? This is the free service for you, as 5 Nugget Saturday is my curated list of tips and analytics. In addition, you'll get access to my March Madness cheat sheet, which makes it drop dead easy to fill out your bracket. To sign up for free, go to thepowerrank.com. That is my site for better sports betting tips and March Madness bracket advice. That's thepowerrank.com. Edward, can you give us a surprise prediction for the 2024 NCAA tournament?
Are you okay if we do surprise predictions plural?
Sure. We love it.
Good deal. It's answering a question with a question is always a great idea, I think. So yes, there are a few that sort of stand out as far as things that I think might be flying under the radar that I wanted to sort of hash out, and then we can chat about it. And one team that normally is an absolute powerhouse, a wrecking ball that has sort of fallen by the wayside, so to speak, that I wonder how good are they really, is Michigan State. And it's possible that, you know, if you go by, say, Bracket Matrix and the other projections, they're going to make the tournament as probably a 9 seed. And I would not be surprised if they are a 9 seed that they go out and upset the number 1 seed in their particular region, as long as it's, say, not UConn, for instance. I think that might be a bad matchup, but I could definitely see situations where if Michigan State is the 9 seed and they get a favorable matchup against the 1, assuming they win that first round game, I could see Michigan State going on a little bit of a run. And there are many reasons for this. Number one, preseason predictions do carry some weight. Spartans were 4th in America to start the year. Your analytic of choice loves this team, ranked around 20th, depending upon what you look at. Great defense. They were dealt some terrible adversity around Christmas. Trey Holloman has been a great three-point shooter. Malik Hall has a good game down low. Lots of seniors playing significant minutes may matter here. I think they can enjoy some positive regression, and I will be looking at their number to win the Big Ten tournament title carefully. But I do think Michigan State, you know, despite being an outstanding program under Tom Izzo, one of the last remaining veteran coaches out there, I am curious just how good they really can be after, you know, a few more games of seasoning to see what they're capable of going forward. So there is that aspect that I'm just sort of circling right now. And maybe it's not a bet I make right now, but it's just something I want to look at going forward. So that's the first thing.
Excellent.
Yeah. The second thing is, one thing that I wanted to do was sort of make a case study, do some case study research and figure out, okay, we have had some major Cinderellas over the last few years. And what I wanted to see was what they excelled at. So I looked at these Cinderellas over the last 3 years and said, okay, per Bart Torvik, what was something that they went into the tournament already performing well at? So like 2023, Florida Atlantic, effective field goal defense, 2-point defense. Those were their calling cards. Princeton, defensive rebounding, low 3-point rate defense allowed. So they're not allowing many teams to hoist threes. So that to me is interesting. 2022, St. Peter's, effective field goal defense and 2-point defense. To me, North Carolina as an 8 seed was a Cinderella. Defensive rebounding and free throw defense. Those were their calling cards. And then in 2021, Oral Roberts, great offensive numbers, but a good 3-point rate defense. UCLA and Oregon State. UCLA, nothing really stood out defensively. Oregon State, 3-point defense was really good. And I do worry about looking at small sample sizes because there's a ton of variance in the tournament, something you and I have talked about at length. But what does seem to be a common bond in this case study is that there's some defensive element that all these Cinderellas have. And it may not necessarily be the same thing, but there's something that they do really, really well that maybe a series of teams just won't be prepared for. So then I wanted to look at this year and go, okay, what's some defensive element? Not so much like your Ken Pom defense or your, adjusted defensive efficiency. Like those are very important. But I wanted to see if there was some element that maybe a team can use and, really use it like gangbusters. So Creighton really jumps out in several metrics, notably 3-point rate defense. 28-1 on DraftKings to win it all. Dominant wins over Marquette and UConn, though both were at home, and we'll get to the home-away dynamic in just a bit. But if you really want to get cray-cray in terms of, say, trying to find some Cinderella no team's talking about, one mid-major that really stood out to me is UC Irvine at 95-1 to make the Final Four on FanDuel. Please don't go nuts betting this one, but to me, if I just had to pick a mid-major that I want to fall in love with right here, right now, it's going to be the Anteaters. 7th in effective field goal defense, 7th in 2-point defense, 16th in 3-point rate allowed. If it plays out like Bracket Matrix suggests, they may be in the West Regional, and those regional games are played in Los Angeles, which is a lot of travel for most everyone else except UC Irvine. Yes, they do have to win their conference, but there aren't many contenders for the Big West title. So the inflated number is for right here, right now. If I had to pick a Cinderella, it would be them. But I do think Creighton does have some value to win the national championship. And Michigan State, despite kind of flying under the radar, they also seem like an interesting selection.
Excellent. I love the insight on Irvine. They are actually in the 70s in my numbers. So that is something, definitely a team that I will keep my eye on. You said they do need to win their tournament, right, to get in?
Yes. In terms of the projections, they absolutely have to. But they are the favorite, and rightfully so. And it doesn't look like there are too many other contenders to win that conference.
Creighton's also a really fascinating team for me. First time I saw them play was at home against UConn. I was actually trying to scout UConn, and Creighton actually just thrashed them. Great ball movement. They hit half of the threes. Plenty of talent to go all the way around. I forget the name of the little point guard, but he hit everything. Mm-hmm. And when you do that to Connecticut, who I think is the best team in this tournament, I don't really think there's a doubt. But when you do that to UConn, like, you certainly have potential. What else are you seeing with Creighton?
To me, yes, there is a little bit of volatility in terms of, what they can put together offensively. But when you're looking at, say, your well-rounded teams, it's hard not to fall in love with them. I think the state of the Big East will be really fascinating because certainly if you're looking at strength of schedule, and I know that in terms of figuring out, okay, how much do we like UConn versus Purdue versus, say, another Big Ten Big Ten contender, something like that. Certainly the Big East, the bottom feeders certainly hurt that conference's strength of schedule. But, Creighton, Marquette, UConn. This is a really, really top-heavy kind of conference with some real good contenders. And so I don't want Creighton to sort of get lost in the shuffle as far as that conversation is concerned, because it's very easy to fall in love with UConn, and really to an extent Marquette as well. But definitely the Blue Jays are worth their due.
Excellent. Edward, so what is your favorite team to win the 2024 NCAA tournament?
It's one of those exercises where I don't want to necessarily just say, okay, well, this is the best team, therefore they should be the favorite to win the tournament. I think it requires a little bit more of a study than that. Like I mentioned before, Bracket Matrix has been a fantastic resource for me when it comes to just figuring out, okay, where are these teams likely going to play and who are they likely going to be pitted up against? Because yeah, UConn may get the number 1 overall seed, but if they get a dangerous 2 in their region, then, we need to, look at that seriously. Travel, if a lack of travel matters at all, to me, picking the favorite has to boil down to Purdue, UConn, or Houston. Surprise, surprise. It's funny because a lot of pundits are starting to come out and answer this very question. And if I were to do, say, sentiment analysis, when pundits say, quote unquote, on paper, I'd pick this team, to me, it suggests the analytics prefer them, but grit or previous success means they want to go in a different direction. And so I wouldn't be surprised if we hear a lot between now and tip-off of the round of 64 that we're going to hear Purdue on paper looks like the best team, but UConn has that it factor, so I got to go with the Huskies. And certainly the Huskies, if you answer the question that way, I mean, they're certainly fine here. What's interesting to me is when I look at all of my, analytic resources, all the projections out there, almost everybody has Houston number 1, but Evan Mia has them 5th, whereas UConn and Purdue are all in the top 3 in all of these lists. And so I do wonder, what is it about Houston that may be a little bit different or suspect or something of the sort? And I go back to the conversation you had with Jordan Sperber, which I really enjoyed in a previous episode, about how Houston doesn't get into drop coverage. They rather take risks for deflections and such. But my question then would be, okay, in a tournament where you have to win 6 games, are you going to come across somebody who just shoots really, really well from 3? And will Houston have answers if that happens? That's going to be my biggest question. I think it's one of those deals where if you're, say, betting on Houston individually, I wouldn't be surprised if you don't think Houston wins this game, then expect a blowout against them. That might be the overall approach if you're looking at this individually. But in terms of who you think will win the national championship, certainly, I would be careful in terms of what path Houston might have if they come across a hot 3-point shooting team like Kentucky, for instance. That might be a problem for them. Certainly, Houston's elite at protecting the ball, getting bodies to grab offensive boards, but they don't manufacture great shots everywhere. And so right. I don't know if Houston is capable of making any kind of drastic comeback if they, fall double digits, something like that. But UConn and Purdue, they can do all of these things. They can manufacture just about whatever shot they want. Purdue, much tougher strength of schedule, so I would give them the slightest edge as my favorite. But at this point, given the numbers out there, it's not a bet I would make, or I wouldn't necessarily fill out my bracket for Purdue to win it all, just because they may be a little bit too chalky, and sometimes it's good to diversify the portfolio, so to speak. But if you're asking me right now, who do I think will win it all, I'm going to pick the Boilermakers.
Fascinating. I think Houston is a fascinating team. They play so hard on defense. They are such a great defensive program. Yet on offense, they literally can't shoot the ball. They're adjusted 2-point field goal. Kind of does. So Edward Egros is a great 3-point shooter. He's been doing pretty well. Emmanuel Sharp is someone who I think is a better shooter than his numbers suggest. But man, when you look at their 2-point field goal percentage, it's bad. And worse, a lot worse than it has been in past seasons for this Houston program. Someone on a broadcast said that their offense is manufactured to fail. So their offense is pretty efficient. I think it's like top 20 or something. And they do it because of offensive rebounding. So my question is, if they have an off shooting game and then they come up against a team that's pretty big and is good at blocking out, then what happens? Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, I don't know. I mean, I will be rooting for Houston. I personally really like the program that Kelvin Sampson has put together down there. I love Jamal Shed as a lead guard. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think they're even more interesting this year than they normally are.
I would be curious too, because Houston, especially the last few years, they've been really consistent. Defensively, they play the same way. Yeah, you've got different stars, different years, but they've been, I'd say consistently successful about as much as any program going, say, over the last 3-4 years. But at the same time, I wonder, okay, does that mean 1 year everybody else has to take a step back for them to really make a run in this thing? And is this the year? Do we believe in UConn and Purdue enough to where they can overpower Houston offensively because they can shoot the three so well, et cetera? It's almost as though because the Final Four, given sight lines and being in a football stadium, all that stuff, and sometimes teams resort to twos a little bit more than threes, in those final couple of games. I do wonder, like, if Houston does make the Final Four, then they should be the favorite. But it's those regional games we should be mindful of. Those may be the games where they trip up a little bit, especially if they go up against a hot 3-point shooting team.
And then for Purdue, I also wanted to ask you, Zach Edey is great. They have an amazing offense where they have Edey in the middle and a bunch of shooters around them that I think as a team, they're making 40% of their threes, which is, an elite rate for an individual, much less a team. I did want to ask you about their defense. I just feel like some of their wing players like Fletcher Lawyer might just break out there. So thin and frail. I mean, do you think they're going to how would they kind of match up against an athletic team like a Kentucky? That's what I worry about when I think about Purdue as a national championship team.
And that's fair. I think that's a fair criticism. I mean, what if you can work around Zach Edey? What does that mean exactly? Like he is only one person. Yeah, he takes up a lot of space. But let's say you get him into foul trouble, for instance. What's the backup plan for Purdue? Or if you're able to set up plays where he's kind of off to the side, or you operate from the corners, something like that. Certainly, Kentucky's able to be versatile offensively. It's one of the reasons why they've been so fascinating as far as a potential team to get one of the better seeds, given how well they played over the last month. It is fascinating. I don't necessarily think that we should look at their early exit from last year and take a whole lot. Yeah, to me, there's not much substance there. A lot of things went wrong, and to me, this Purdue team is even better. So give them that kind of credit. I think also too, given their style, that they don't necessarily force a lot of steals. That's going to be intriguing to me. Like if they do face a little bit of adversity, what can they do to get back into a basketball game? That to me is also a big question, but definitely like Zach Edey needs to be out there. He needs to be playing significant minutes. And I think given the structure of the tournament, he's not going to wear down. I'm not necessarily concerned about that. It's just going to be, will he get pushed to a side? Will he get into foul trouble? Those are going to be my questions.
Edward, wanted to ask you about Alabama. Nate Oates' team loves to shoot the three. They take almost half of their shots from there. But then you see the flip side of that. They got smoked at Florida last night. What are you seeing with this team?
The seasons when we seriously considered Alabama to be a Final Four contender, think 2021 with Jaden Shackelford, John Petty Jr., 2023 with Brandon Miller, Noah Clowney, it was really their defense that made them complete. And they were well-rounded, defending twos and threes consistently, including last year, number one effective field goal rate allowed per Bart Torvik. Lots of things defensively made us fall in love with Bama. And then they would also shoot the three. And so offensively, analytically, they were spectacular. What's not to like when it comes to how they play basketball? But this season, effective field goal rate is nearly 50%. That in defense, outside the top 100. So they are allowing a lot of good looks. They are allowing a good number of threes made. And Alabama's not forcing steals. They're fouling too much. They give up a lot of open baskets down low. Yes, it's still a fast tempo, but possession stats will tell you this is not the usual elite Nate Oates defense. That's what concerns me more than anything else. Schedule may be slightly tougher than in the last few years, but it's not a slate that should produce these kinds of results. Well-roundedness is really important when it comes to picking your national champion and to an extent your Final Four participants. And to me, Bama doesn't have that well-roundedness. Assuming they snag a 4 seed, this is not a run I would back. I do feel like that Alabama could face, say, a second round exit or a regional semi exit just because that defense isn't there and they go up against, say, a hot shooting 3-point team, something like that, then they're going to be in big trouble and they don't necessarily have a way to clamp down stifle an opponent in the second half, and then to be able to make a significant comeback.
Alabama's 85th in my defensive efficiency numbers, so that's points per possession adjusted for strength of schedule. You did mention Alabama's strength of schedule, and I think that's an interesting point going into this tournament. The SEC is really tough, right? I mean, I think the world of this Tennessee team. I think Dalton Connect is for real. I think he's really good. I think Auburn's really good. Alabama's up there too, and then Kentucky has just an insane amount of talent on that team. Another team that really isn't doing it on the defensive side of the ball, but a team that you absolutely don't want to face. And so, I've been watching a lot of SEC games. Alabama has played a tough schedule, so we'll see how that all shakes out, right? So maybe it seems kind of easy once they get into the round of 32 because they're probably not going to have another SEC team. Are you kind of surprised to see so many strong teams down south?
I think one or two are a tad surprising. South Carolina certainly has been bandied about as a top 15 team. That I wasn't necessarily expecting, but then I watched, say, like a non-conference game they had or an early conference game they had, and I came away super duper impressed. I had no idea South Carolina could be this talented. So, that's another one that's definitely worth bringing up. Auburn, not surprised by them. Kentucky, the run has been super impressive. And hey, look, talk about a team that shoots a three at a high rate and does it well. Kentucky, over the last month, they've improved their offensive efficiency at a top 20 rate nationally. And despite the defensive concerns that they may have, Kentucky might be one of those few teams where I'm willing to succumb to recency bias and say, yeah, they're a really good team, and I could definitely see them making a charge here. But as far as am I surprised the SEC is this good, to me, circling back to Alabama, yes, the SEC is better this year than, say, the last few, but it's not like Alabama hasn't played good teams. There were other fantastic contenders in that conference. Maybe there are just more of them this go round, but I don't necessarily think that the disparity in overall conference performance and ability, I don't think that's something that I would necessarily look at and say, okay, well, let's forgive the defensive lapses by Alabama. I wouldn't take that step.
Excellent. Edward, I wanted to ask you about the analytics college basketball resources that you use to prepare. You've already mentioned them on the show already, but maybe give us the top three kind of sources you go to when you're breaking down teams.
For sure. And certainly everyone talks about KenPom a lot, and that'll get bandied about a good bit between now and tip-off, and that's fantastic. I think my purpose for looking at KenPom is more just to say, all right, for those who maybe don't follow a whole lot of college basketball and they want some sort of quick and easy metric, I think most people kind of go in that direction. If I'm, say, betting on games or filling out my bracket, maybe I want to go in a slightly different direction when it comes to, okay, yeah, I'm obviously a data scientist, but is there a different way to look at these things to where I'm not necessarily filling out my bracket the way KenPom would necessarily do it? So I want to look at that in terms of a consensus kind of perspective. But in terms of what I really care about, Bart Torvik is great in terms of getting the guts of efficiency numbers. Haslametrics also provides some guts that really help me in terms of understanding, okay, 3-point rate allowed. If I'm looking at props, which player might have the most opportunities to hoist threes, maybe that will be fascinating. One other website, too, that I want to bring up is hoop-math.com. Hoop-math.com. They do this cool thing where you can look at how teams use the shot clock, what typically happens during the first 10 seconds offensively and defensively. And to me, this is important because if you're looking at pace of play, if you're betting on totals or figuring out, okay, can this high-octane team go up against this team that will give you, say, 8 possessions for the entire game, how does this happen? Is it because of rebounding or steals or whatever? That's what I want to know. What makes the pace go quickly or slowly? And if you believe that the tournament is more about matchups than, say, overall team strength, then Hoop-Math, I think, is really useful in terms of understanding, to an extent, styles, approaches. What are these teams prioritizing? And if you know that, then I think that can get you one step forward to figuring out exactly what kind of game you will be watching.
Excellent. Edward, I'm really lucky to have you working with me again this year on the Bracket Wisdom series. These are a series of short 10-minute podcasts. They'll come out daily over the next couple of weeks. I actually didn't do this last year. I was just looking. I was like, oh, I guess I didn't do that last year. You were working at the NFL. Couldn't work together with you on it, and I kind of just put up some podcasts those 4 days before the tournament started. But really fortunate to have you on board. These are solo episodes, so it's not like there's an overlap. It won't be us talking or anything. But just to let you know, I will be recording my first one tomorrow. I will be talking about the big mistake that people make in filling out your bracket. It has somewhat to do with 12/5 upsets and things like that. So I'm excited to get that going tomorrow. I will actually also be doing an episode on the preseason AP poll, and that's also been interesting as well. There'll be a couple teams. I'll talk about Kansas in that one. Looks like I'll also talk briefly about Auburn, too. What has been going on with you and the Bracket Wisdom episodes that you'll be doing?
The one that has taken up the most of my bandwidth is all of these upsets with unranked home dogs against ranked road favorites. It's something that really dominated the college basketball narrative early, say, in the conference slate. And I think it's still something that we bandy about a good bit. And when it comes to the NCAA tournament, okay, everything's on a neutral court. So what? Who cares? And we'll talk in the podcast about which teams have the biggest performance disparity between home and away, if this matters at all, how those kinds of teams fared last year, which may be prime for early exits this season, because I think, Creighton is such a fascinating case study, right? Because they have all these fantastic home wins, and not that they're slouches everywhere else, but you go, okay, is this going to sway too many people to take Creighton to make a charge all the way to the Final Four? Should we be doing that? And so that's something that, I will get into in greater detail in the episode. But awesome. One thing that I want to bring up right here, right now, is I wanted to get into why home teams play better and if those differences are even more pronounced this season. So home teams normally attempt more than 2 free throws than their opponents. But the difference from last season to this year is almost a full half a free throw. So home teams are going to the line more often this year compared with last. It's already a difference, but it's even more pronounced this season. Defensive rebounding has gone up just a hair. Assists have gone up too by roughly a third of an assist, from 1.8 to 2.1 in terms of how much more often assists are recorded by the home team compared with the road team. Ball movement for home teams seem to have improved. Steals have gone up. Field goal attempts have gone down, but I think that's just a product of having leads. And so all of these natural differences that we should expect in favor of the home team, I think across the board, they are a good bit more pronounced. And so the exercise for me, and I suppose for us, is to figure out, okay, if you can try and filter all of that out and have more of a baseline, are there overrated teams? Are there underrated teams that maybe don't necessarily stand out in terms of the resume, but they are more than capable of making a charge because all those advantages they enjoyed or didn't enjoy are going to be there?
The Creighton one is fascinating, right? Because they had such a huge margin of victory against a really good UConn team that's simply going to skew a lot of their efficiency numbers at home, right?
Right.
So be interested to see what your analysis comes up with there. We do know a lot about home court advantage. A big part of it is the refs, and they did a nice study about that in scorecasting. Anyways, if you haven't ever read that stuff, you should go check that out. It's a really good book. John Wortham was one of the authors. He is at Sports Illustrated. Does Sports Illustrated still exist? Is that still
in memory, I suppose? Philosophically.
Anyways, John's fine. He's a senior person. He does some stuff with 60 Minutes. So the refs are definitely one aspect of home advantage. I think that's why you see the home team shooting more free throws. That's clearly a ref thing. So that's one aspect of it. But I do feel like you just play more pumped up at home, right? And it'd be interesting to kind of like tease that out, right? I guess you should see a much higher offensive rebounding rate at home because that's kind of an energy thing, maybe I would suspect. So yeah, it would be interesting to tease that out, right? Because you've clearly already talked about how free throws there's more free throws, so there's probably it's probably a fluke, but to have it that much more. But there are some teams that have really enjoyed a free throw advantage at home, and then you take that away. Okay, well maybe we could see that coming when they hit the NCAA tournament, but I don't even know where I'm going with this. Anyways, there's a reason for home court advantage, and I'm looking forward to your analysis of why it doesn't happen. Any team, maybe you can tease another team that you're thinking about for that episode.
Well, one thing I did in terms of, say, last season was look at overall results to figure out, okay, which teams maybe enjoyed too much of a home court advantage in terms of maybe a greater adjustment should have been made. Duke really stood out last year. I believe they were a 5 seed. They had an earlier exit than perhaps anticipated. But, I think they went out in the second round. So, by seeding, not so much. But at the same time, still, when Duke's in the tournament, like certainly the expectations are high as far as what they can do. But I think for the most part, they really stood out. And, I don't have some of the others, listed right now. But it does seem like across the board, those teams that enjoy a much greater home court advantage, they tend to slip a little bit more. And I think there's something to be said for that. Whether, say, you're playing in a conference where teams have to have significant travel to get to you, if, say, your student body is just a little bit louder than, say, others, whatever the case may be. Elevation also matters a great deal. Some home courts, are a little bit tougher to play at than others just because of elevation or getting there. Sometimes I think even the schedule matters a great deal. Some teams have to do the Thursday, Saturday thing. And so then, it's not quite back to back, but with the travel for college kids, it can be a little bit more treacherous. So I think all of those things at least have to be factored in and addressed, if nothing else. Not necessarily, you make over adjustments, but definitely they are at least worth the conversation.
Edward Egros, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the Football Analytics Show. Please let everyone know where they can find you online and all your good work.
Absolutely. So I am on X and Instagram at Ed with Sports, And we will also have some Bally Sports West segments coming out, talking about the Clippers and the LA Kings and the Ducks. So it is that time of year where all these wonderful sports are converging, and I can't wait for it.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, there's lots of things to fill the void left by football, right? We don't just have to like watch NFL free agency over the next month.
Right. Not that there's anything wrong with that, not at all. And we can go back and look at 40 times if we so choose, or shuttle runs and go back to those X videos and all that fun stuff. But we do have other things that we can enjoy in terms of actual games, actual results.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host. Just a reminder, you can get my free sports betting email newsletter. This also includes my March Madness cheat sheet. Check that out at thepowerrank.com. As mentioned in the show, the Bracket Wisdom series will start next week. This is a daily series of podcast episodes. They're solo episodes, about 10 minutes, and they're all geared to get you ready for March Madness, to win your pool, to bet on games, to do all those things. So look for the Bracket Wisdom series on this podcast feed next week. Once again, my name is Ed Fang, your host for the Football Analytics Show, or the Bracket Wisdom Show next week. I will talk to you again then.